While black people studied the Bible, believing that it contained the true words of God that will protect us, white oppressive forces studied instead how to psychologically imprison the minds of targeted populations through their monopoly over information. They then used that gained knowledge to mentally enslave millions of black people. And because black people are so religious, rather than confronting this fact, we instead just cling to our Bibles, being totally clueless of the reality and fact that it's merely one of the many tools that's being used to mentally enslave us. They use religion to get us to give up our critical thinking skills and to replace it with blind faith. So as a result of this, we now want to be holy instead of intelligent. Therefore, most black people have little understanding of the ramifications of the psychological warfare that's presently being deployed against us. Our study of religions have left many of us intellectually behind in our own mental growth. Therefore, we are easy victims of those who knows how to manipulate the mind. Many black people have diagnosed our collective condition as being a result of a slave syndrome myth or the Stockholm syndrome. However, both of these premises are absolutely untrue. The truth is that black people's collective condition are direct consequences of the disinformation that has been deliberately, systematically, and repetitively fed into our minds by white oppressive forces. Because they control the information that black people receives, this allows them to control what black people believes. They've exploited this scenario by systematically feeding disinformation into our collective minds that makes us think in ways that are harmful to ourselves and beneficial to their white society. Regardless of how intelligent people are, if it's possible to control the information that a targeted population receives, it's entirely possible to control what they'll believe. The human mind is actually easy to manipulate when the targeted population is unaware of what's being done to them. Case, point, and proof. The reason why they only show black people tragedies in the media about ourselves is because doing so makes us live in fear of each other. Fear is one of the most powerful human emotions. When one is gripped by fear of a threat, real or imagined, their rational and higher cognitive capacity shuts down, making them easily manipulated by anyone promising to provide them with safety. Ruling classes for thousands of years have understood the power of intentionally invoking fear in a subordinate population as a means of social control. The reason why the white society exaggerates black on black crimes is because doing so manipulates us to perceive ourselves as being our own worst enemy, and it shifts black collective aggressions away from the white society and redirects it towards ourselves. It also attacks the core foundation of what bonds us as a people, and we can then be ruled over indefinitely. The reason why virtually all black racially affirming facts are withheld from black students during our education development is actually essential for maintaining white social dominance over black people. Because for a ruling class to maintain its position of social dominance over its oppressed population, they must condition the oppressed from a very early age to accept their own subordinate status and to adhere to the authority of the dominant culture. To do so, the education given to the oppressed from the time that their minds are young and most impressionable must be the type that denies them of racially affirming facts. This is the reason why we're learning more black racially affirming facts from each other here than we're doing it within our school. When the oppressed population is denied a racially affirming education, this psychologically assigns the oppressed to a subordinate status within the society. When the oppressed are denied a racially affirming education, even the brightest among them may have little of any hope of mentally extricating themselves from their assigned low-dominated position within the society. White social scientists describe this nefarious practice as merely instilling a value system into the collective subconscious minds of the subordinate population that makes them adhere to the authority and existing infrastructure of the dominant culture. The reason why white media controllers so negatively distort the image of Africa is because doing so makes descendants of enslaved Africans perceive the enslavement of our ancestors as being more of a rescue mission that ultimately benefited us. To achieve this objective, white propaganda designers constantly subject African Americans to seeing only those images of war-torn, famine-ridden, rapidly illiterate, and disease-stricken Africa. By only showing the poorest parts of Africa, this conveys a subliminal message that we descendants of the slaves were the lucky ones to have been taken away from the backwardness of Africa. It literally makes millions of African Americans embarrassed of their African heritage and grateful that slavery happened. Many openly says it because it's now perceived as having been a rescue mission that took us away from the backwardness of Africa. And because of this deliberate embedded belief in our minds, it has also prevented millions of us to pursuing the reparations that we're still owed. There's more. Have you ever noticed that virtually all health studies results from white sources favor themselves over black people? Can you not see just how cartoonishly unrealistic the scenario actually is? To consistently have results so one-sidedly favoring one racial group over another, as we're experiencing whites favoring over us, is statistically ridiculous. It's actually fraudulent propaganda that over time and through repetition, they're deliberately designed to gradually embed the myth of white superiority into our collective subconscious minds. When black people constantly receive health study results favoring whites over blacks, it is not a big stretch to draw the conclusion that whites are inherently superior. It's in fact a normal progression when you're constantly receiving that propaganda. The reason why the white society constantly inundates black people with fraudulent negative narratives about ourselves is to heavily demoralize us. Demoralization is a well-proven way of controlling targeted populations. When a targeted population is continuously barraged with demoralizing disinformation about themselves, they become demoralized, divided, self-loathing. It also undermines their morale, and it pushes them into a web of confusion. When people have been demoralized heavily, they'll start often demoralizing themselves. White social scientists also determined a long time ago that by systematically falsely marginalizing virtually everything that black people believes about ourselves, while simultaneously falsely exalting everything that we believe about Caucasians, they can instill a value system into our subconscious minds that makes us more compliant with white dominance over our lives. To meet this objective, they even distort their published maps to make Africa appear 13 times smaller than its true prospective size, while making all white countries appear significantly larger than their true prospective sizes. This is precisely what the author and activist Jane Elliott has been explaining for decades. Sadly, most people are not familiar with social science, so what she says tend to go over the heads of many people. She's not just talking about maps. The white society distorts many facts, images, and facts in order to subliminally convey the myth of white racial superiority over black people. It's designed to create and sustain false assumptions within a society that aids the white society in maintaining its social dominance over black people. The white society is literally falsely scripted to create a perception of white superiority over black people. Because perceptions are immensely powerful. So therefore, the white society creates perceptions that aids them in maintaining their social dominance over black people. This is the reality we have to learn. We have to recognize. Now, when I talked about the demoralizing one, I want to give you an example of how you control people through demoralization. It's an effective weapon. Let's see people driving the car, and they missed their turn. They missed the turn. Now they got so demoralized because they missed the turn. Now they've been lost for a couple hours. the demoralization effects of people. Let me give you a more one that's more accurate to our plight. And you may have heard it before. There's a ship, a crew out at sea, and they're on a well-functioning ship. And you take control of all of their narratives, and you keep feeding to the ship that your ship is not seaworthy, slowly sinking, that your crew is incompetent, that your crew is lost, that a mutiny is being planned. With time, the group constantly receiving the negative information about themselves become demoralized, divided, and self-loathing. And they start resenting their crew members. And they will dive off the ship and swim toward those who are taunting against them. Those who remain on the ship will call the ones swimming away coons and sellouts. But they merely have weaker minds that collapse under the constant demoralization. These are tactics, social science tactics that the white society deploys for maintaining their dominance. As long as we keep our head buried in a biblical fairy tale and a silly slave syndrome, we are damn fools. We have now been in America. It's been over 403 years since the first African slave was brought to America. If after 403 years, your best assessment is still that our plot is connected to a Bible that was brutally beaten into the minds of our ancestors, and that our condition is a result of a silly slave syndrome myth, you should be a damn shame of yourself. Learn the truth, and let's develop ways to overcome it. One love and peace.